What makes a passport good? It is often assumed that a country's diplomatic status determines how many places the country's passport can have access to. If country A has a better relationship with country B than with country C, then it makes sense that A and B will allow each other's citizens to travel freely between them. In a world of international relations, it's important to have diplomatic ties with as many countries as possible so that more open channels of negotiation are available at times of need. At least, that's what people think. But once in a while, we have an outlier, a unicorn, that disobeys every norm in the foreign policy playbook, has the fewest friends in the world, yet still manages to have a decent passport that offers great mobility. The country in question is Taiwan. Or the question should be, is it a country? Good day, fellow Planeteers. Welcome back to Passport Planet, a channel all about the VIP. Today's video is all about the Taiwanese passport. Remember to stay till the end to hear my personal story from when I was working for the United Nations. Alright, I don't think anyone would disagree when I say the number of countries your government has diplomatic relations with contributes to the number of countries your passport can travel to. However, the correlation is not always there. A while ago, I made a video on the number of countries the North Korean passport can travel to without visas. Check it out if you haven't. And despite being called the Hermit Kingdom, North Korea is actually pretty outgoing on the international stage. It has formal diplomatic ties with 164 countries. However, as I mentioned in that video, only 7 countries allow visa-free entry of North Korean passport holders. Therefore, the number of diplomatic relations doesn't always convert to visa-free destinations. Taiwan is probably the best reverse example. Only 14 countries in the world recognize Taiwan, but 146 countries will welcome the Taiwanese passport. This makes Taiwan the 32nd best country in the world in terms of passport strength. Now, by no means it makes this passport a first-tier travel document. I mean, it's got the same amount of visa-free countries as Mauritius and St. Vincent, and it doesn't even come close to some of the passports from developing countries. For example, the Malaysian passport, which I have talked about on this channel, has way more visa-free destinations and ranks much higher than the Taiwanese one. So why do I still praise the Taiwanese passport even though, by all metrics, it's just middle of the pack? Well, it all comes down to contrast. With only 14 diplomatic relations, Taiwan is one of the most ostracized countries in the whole world. Yet, in spite of such difficulties, it still managed to pull off 146 visa-free countries including Europe and the United States. Now, that's amazing. How did Taiwan achieve this impossible task? To explain the intricate situation in Taiwan, we need to go back in time. Luckily, I have already made a video on the history between Taiwan and China. Click it on the upper right. To summarize, Taiwan as we know it exists as the Republic of China. But the Republic of China is not China, but also not Taiwan.
People's Republic of China is China, but doesn't include Taiwan. Republic of China thinks itself as China, but also Taiwan. People's Republic of China doesn't think that the Republic of China is China, but also not Taiwan.
Alright, enough with the tongue twister, but since both sides use the same China trademark and claim the same thing, the dilemma for you as a third country is that you're now forced to only recognize one of them. There are 3 ways to approach this problem. 1. Cave in to whoever is bigger and scarier. This approach is chosen by 132 countries, as they only recognize China and pretend Taiwan doesn't exist. 2. Recognize Taiwan, much to the chagrin of China. This is the riskiest option because doing so antagonizes Beijing and leads to grave economic and political consequences, which is why only 14 tiny countries with nothing to lose are willing to do this. 3. And the final option is to maintain an official relationship with China, but at the same time keep Taiwan on the side as a balancing act. This approach is used by 57 major countries in the world. As much as the third approach seems reasonable, it's also the most tricky. Imagine opening an embassy in Taiwan without calling it an embassy. Case in point, the American quote-unquote embassy in Taiwan is called the American Institute, which sounds like a research facility, but it's actually a fully functioning embassy. It occupies 16 acres of land, which is 5 times bigger than the American Embassy in Tokyo. It has about 400 American staffs working in it, which is more than the total number of American diplomats in China. But the most fascinating thing about the American Institute is that, despite having diplomatic privileges, its legal identity is only a non-profit corporation, therefore leaving China very few excuses to be angry. Thanks to these unofficial channels, Taiwan managed to climb up the passport rankings through the years. In fact, just little over a decade ago in 2006, Taiwan's passport had visa-free access to only 42 countries, a number similar to those of Papua New Guinea and Zimbabwe. It was around the 2010s when Taiwan Passport had drastic improvements. There were a couple reasons for this. One of them is that Taiwan's implemented the electronic passport in 2008, which had better security features and were compliant with international standards. But ultimately, I think it has a lot to do with Taiwan's new diplomatic strategies. In that old video, we know that ever since the Chinese Civil War, Taiwan and China had been fighting over other countries' recognition. And China usually ends up the winner due to its sheer size and scale, which explains why Taiwan now has only 14 diplomatic relations left. However, in the 2000s, Taiwan decided to apply a more pragmatic strategy in its foreign relations, namely to let go of formal diplomatic relations and take the more informal, soft power, people-to-people approach. Now, if this sounds like mumbo-jumbo to you, then allow me to use an example. If you are a subscriber to this channel, then you have seen the recent news that Nicaragua broke its diplomatic ties with Taiwan and turned to Beijing. If you're not a subscriber to the channel, now's your time to subscribe to keep yourself in the loop. Anyway, that piece of news in isolation sounds like Taiwan just lost a friend. But if you look at Nicaragua's visa treatment towards Taiwan and China, you'll find out that the Taiwanese passport holders can still go to Nicaragua without a visa, whereas a visa is required for Chinese citizens. In other words, just because Nicaragua now has a Chinese embassy doesn't mean they like Chinese people. And Taiwan's strategy is exactly the opposite of Beijing's. Instead of pursuing diplomatic recognitions in name only, they value more practical things such as visa-free treatment. I believe it was thanks to this new strategy, the Taiwanese passport got visa-free treatment from the UK in 2009, Canada in 2010, European Union in 2011, and the United States in 2012. Of course, there were tolls that had to be paid, but I have already made a video about that, top right on the old spot. After all that, I have to talk about the problems of the Taiwanese passport, which it's got a bunch. First of all, despite having 146 visa-free destinations, the passport is abysmal in Africa and Latin America. The reason is pretty simple. Africa is basically a Chinese colony by now, and so is a lot of Latin America. But China's influence goes way beyond just 2 continents. Zooming into Eastern Europe, you'll find that Serbia is also left out. That's because Serbia is such a close friend of China, but a Taiwanese person could still apply for a visa and go to Serbia if they want. The same cannot be said for Georgia, which completely bans the Taiwanese passport. Anyone headed to Georgia with this passport will be denied entry. The exact reason is a mystery, but I don't think it's completely due to the pressure from Beijing, because Georgia also bans passports from Palestine and Kosovo. So it seems that the country has a blanket policy to not allow citizens from any disputed territories. Speaking of denying entry, the United Nations is another place that doesn't allow visitors with Taiwanese passports. Again, as I've discussed in that old video, the UN expelled Taiwanese representatives for Chinese ones back in the 70s, and the Taiwanese identity hasn't been valid in the UN since then. However, that rule is only for visitors. If you have a reference letter or a job offer from the UN, then it doesn't matter which passport you hold. So it's no surprise that there are actually Taiwanese people working in the UN, and I've got to know a couple of them when I was working there as well. For my Taiwanese friend working at the UN, HR is tricky because they cannot be logged as Taiwanese. There's no such option as Taiwan in the nationality section. So the HR said, well, I can put you down as a Chinese person if you want. Now, that's legal because the Chinese government always insists that Taiwan is a province of China, so technically my Taiwanese friend is a Chinese person, according to China. But no one wants to become Chinese that way, so the whole matter became an HR nightmare. In the end, they came to an agreement that my friend would be put into the system as a stateless person, which I find hilarious. But again, this speaks to the complexity of the whole China-Taiwan self-identification issue, which reminds me of another thing. So if you look at the cover of this passport, you see that it says Republic of China, Taiwan. The word Taiwan was only added in 2002 when a more pro-Taiwan independence president was elected. Before the ROC took over, Taiwan was under Japanese rule for 150 years. Most people spoke Japanese and Taiwanese, and suddenly some losers from China came over and said, "I'm your master now," in Mandarin. Of course, the natives will be angry as well as confused. It's totally understandable that they don't want to carry a passport that says China on it. On top of that, having the word China on your passport turns out to be super inconvenient, since ordinary people would probably mistake this passport for this passport. Adding Taiwan to the cover of the passport definitely helped with the confusion. However, as China turns more and more aggressive and unpopular in recent years, the consensus in Taiwan has been calling to abolish the name of ROC as well. In 2020, after some compromises, Taiwan redesigned its passport cover, enlarging the word Taiwan and shrinking Republic of China, in the hopes that the new cover would do a better job conveying the difference between Taiwan and China. Have you been to Taiwan? Do you prefer the Taiwanese or Chinese passport? Leave a comment and let me know. For more passport content, subscribe. I'll see you soon. Peace. Hey guys, if you liked the video, give it a thumbs up. If you want to know more about immigration and passports, hit the bell. I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.